Welcome to ATP Day 2, and we thank you all for joining us at this year's Accelerating Technology Procurement Summit. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today, which brings me into my first introduction, PASS's own Head of Product Development, Bennett Falck. Bennett has had the opportunity to lead 2 development teams that have both produced industry-leading SaaS platforms. Without further ado, I will turn things over to Bennett to speak on the power of relevant data.
All right, good morning, everyone. I take it that everybody can hear me. I can hear myself pretty well here. So, like Natalie mentioned, my name is Bennett Falck. I'm the head of product development here at PASS. And basically what that means is I lead our app development teams, our database infrastructure teams, really geared all around towards technology spend data. And so one of the things that Eric told me to talk about told me to mention when he was telling me that I was going to give a talk at ATP here is basically that I'm a little bit of a geek. So I work with data all day, every day, and that's really my world. So really excited to talk to you guys here today about the power of relevant data and how PASS utilizes data both as a competitive advantage for ourselves, but then also giving that competitive advantage to our clients as well. So just wanted to give a quick background on PASS for those of you who may not be quite as familiar. PASS is a technology spend analytics firm. In fact, we're the global leader in technology spend analytics. And so basically what that means is that we save our clients money on their indirect technology. And so the way that we do that is through primarily our data, but then also our executive network of contacts within these suppliers, and then our expertise. We have a whole staff of procurement experts who are really going through this data and figuring out exactly how to achieve these savings outcomes for our clients. So with that in mind, I want to start here today with one of my favorite quotes from the business world. It's a quote from David Abney, who's the former CEO of UPS. And he says, "Complacency poses one of the most serious threats to any business." And so complacency, at least in my world, is staying static with data strategy. And so that's really what we're here to talk about today, is being more dynamic and being more active about that data strategy to really leverage the tools and the advantages that can come alongside a really strong data strategy. So I want to first start out with just a simple question: what is data? Data is a lot of things. It's a little bit hard to define almost. But the first thing that it is really is information. And collected in the right way, it can be objective information. We've all heard the story that you can make data and make statistics, tell any story that you want, but in true real data collection and the data, especially that PASS has, we can look at that very objectively and help us make decisions on that. So I'm a sports guy. I like data in sports. I'm kind of a junkie on that, and so I like to refer to the Moneyball example. For those of you who are familiar, the movie, following the book by Michael Lewis, centered around Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland Athletics. And so the reason that Billy Beane was able to be successful in that time frame and the reason that it spawned this whole Moneyball movement was because he needed to look at players differently. He needed to look at players objectively. What he had was scouts looking at players and saying, oh, that guy's too short, that guy's too slow, that guy's swing is a little bit funky. And so what Billy Beane did was look at the data, look at players objectively to really find inefficiencies in that market. And so that's the primary thing of what data is it can be objective information. The second thing is confidence. Strong data comes along with a really confident decision-making processes. So quick example of that is if I ask the room generally, pick rock, paper, or scissors. About a third of you guys would choose rock, third would choose paper, third would choose scissors. Now, if I told you, if I gave you the data that I was going to choose rock, you'd know very comfortably, I'm going to choose paper. And that's really what data does, is it is informed decision making. And so the last thing, and this particular one is going to kind of spur on the rest of this talk here, is data is competitive advantage. So this is, again, where PASS has really allowed data to become a competitive advantage for us, and then we are sharing that competitive advantage with our clients to create a competitive advantage for themselves as well. So In their book, Competing on Analytics by Thomas Davenport and Gene Harris, they define competitive advantage with data as these series of things. So they need each one of these 5 things in order to really maintain a competitive advantage in data. First 2, being hard to duplicate and unique. Those 2 kind of go hand in hand, where it needs to be something that is different enough from what's already in the marketplace to where it can't be duplicated already really quickly and then lose that competitive advantage right away. And so PASS has done both of those things, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with PASS Forensics, because we get conversations all the time to say, your data set is unlike anything else we've seen in the market, and that's really powerful. And it's really unique, and it's hard to duplicate because of the processes that we've put in place to actually get at this data. The third thing is adaptable to many situations. And this is kind of where PASS and Invari and data staff, for those of you who are familiar, kind of come all into play with synergistics. Essentially, it's similar solutions to different problems, right? I mean, we're all geared around spend reduction and saving clients money. It's just different ways of doing exactly that. And then the last 2, the better than competition and renewable, are going to be kind of what we talk about with the rest of this talk as well. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. So the benefits, let's see, I should go back one. The benefits of technology procurement data, the benefits of competitive advantage are pretty obvious, just as far as, increased market share, increased profitability, things like that. Again, having a competitive advantage, we all know what that means. Within technology procurement in particular, it means reduced technology spend, shorter procurement cycle, and more favorable terms and conditions. And there's going to be a great talk later today about getting the terms and conditions right on the first try, and that's really, again, one of the benefits of competitive advantage and data in that technology procurement space. So, again, like I said before, the PASS business model is taking that competitive advantage that we have created for ourselves and sharing that with our clients. And the way that we share it with our clients is through our PASS Forensics database. Now, PASS Forensics has real data, relevant data. And so basically what that means is that we have full confidence in every single data point that we have in our system to its own merits. And so that's really powerful because we're collecting. Basically, what real data means is data that has been signed in the marketplace. It's existing contracts between clients and suppliers. It's list prices that have been published by OEMs and VARs. It's spend data that clients have actually purchased at a certain price. And that all adds up to 400 million data points, over 11,000 unique suppliers, and then 2.4 million distinct SKUs with pricing data. And that continues to grow each and every single day. So what I want to talk about now is why that really matters. Real data versus survey data. And so going back to the competitive advantage, why it's unique is we have, at PASS, the real data versus that survey data. And so survey data has a few concerns. We all have heard some of the issues with survey data, just to name a few. Response bias, sampling bias, reward bias, and I'll talk about those in just a sec here. But I want to talk a little bit about Gartner just very quickly. Justin, our GVP of sales, Justin Jones, received a survey a few weeks back from Gartner saying, hey, would you please review any technology that you've procured over the last year? And if you do, we'll give you a $25 gift card to the restaurant of your choice. And so that is rife with problems right there. First, response bias, like I mentioned. We actually don't know who, as a survey giver, we wouldn't know who is responding to that as far as where their biases may lie. Typically what you see is more people responding who are either really angry at the product or really happy with the product. Sampling bias, we actually don't know. Justin forwarded that survey to me, and I was actually able to go through and complete that survey with or without knowledge of that particular product. So often what we've heard is these surveys get passed off to other people within the business who are kind of just looking for that $25 gift card. That leads me to that reward bias. With that $25 gift card, there's an incentive to complete the survey, but not really an incentive for accuracy. And so that not only is for reviewing the products, but also Gartner does the same thing for product pricing data. And so that's how they construct their benchmarks, and that's how they get the data in the market for that pricing. And so with those surveys, there are also a couple assumptions that we really take issue with that we have seen be able to be challenged with our real data. The first one is that bigger spend with a supplier equals better deals. That doesn't necessarily happen. It often happens when we get involved in negotiating, but that doesn't necessarily happen by itself in the market. So we had an example where we had a client who had $10 million in spend with a particular supplier, and they were getting something like a 60% discount overall. And then we had another client who came in and had a very similar deal at $3 million in spend, and they actually already had a 75% discount. So things like that really throw off a lot of those survey numbers, but we have that information already in our system to know exactly what the best deals are. Second thing is good recollection. It assumes that somebody knows what they paid for a technology up to a year after they've already paid for it. So I don't know about you guys, I don't remember anything that I've done 10 or 12 months ago. I certainly wouldn't expect you guys to remember a particular number. I wouldn't remember a particular number about what I paid for a particular item 10 or 12 months ago. But with real data, we are capturing that in the system right away, and it stays there. It's sticky. The third thing is that the market is slow moving, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the point before it, where it assumes that the market stays relatively static. And we all know that that's not the case. Technology changes constantly. Sometimes suppliers change pricing structures every 6 months, and really without warning. And getting that information a full year later makes that necessarily slow. Whereas with PASS, because we're collecting more and more information in real time and knowing exactly when it's time-stamped, we can continue up and be up to date with those trends. And then the fourth assumption is that clients want the average price in the market. If you look at Gartner and look at kind of what they're expecting you to get in the market, generally it's the aggregation of the survey data information. And so because of all of the survey bias concerns that we talked about before, those of you who may have taken a statistics class will recognize this. This is just a simple bell curve. When you're dealing in aggregates with surveys, to eliminate some of the error issues, you end up with a distribution like this. And basically what this means is, if I ask the room now, instead of rock, paper, scissors, if I asked you guys, I have a can of beans right here, how many beans are in this can? Now, some of you may say 100, some of you may say 300, but generally with the wisdom of the crowds, we'd end up kind of in that middle ground of 200 or so. And we'd see a distribution like this, given a large enough sample size. And so basically what this does is it shows you exactly what the average price in the market is, really with no respect for what you want. Again, this is necessitated by some of the error, or by some of the biases associated with survey data that really PASS forensics with our real data doesn't run into. So further illustrated by this, this is a nice slide here showing basically the difference between the average and what PASS forensics gets. So this is a simple scatter chart here with unit price and quantity. And so generally we'd expect to see kind of a downward trajectory there where the more you buy, the less you pay per item. And so that blue line there represents the survey information. This is kind of the average that you're seeing in the marketplace. And maybe we want to try to get to that or a little bit below that even. But with PASS forensics, because we are collecting that real data and we don't have to worry about the bias concerns, we can constantly be getting to that orange line, the lowest possible price for the quantity. And so that gap there, as it shows, are savings. And so maybe that savings is 1% or 2%, but when you're negotiating a $10 million deal, 1% or 2%, especially if in the private equity world with dealing with multipliers like Michael Kedju talked about a little bit yesterday, that ends up adding to a significant amount of money. And so that's really where PASS forensics can really make an impact over survey data, and that's why real data is so important in this market. Last thing I want to talk about is exactly what that means. So with benchmarking capabilities, Pass performs these benchmarks. First of all, it can turn them around within 72 hours, so that's really important. And the second thing is, because we're operating on real data and we're just essentially searching a repository for existing contracts that have already been signed and are relevant, we can benchmark on the proximity to deal expiration, proximity to the supplier fiscal year or quarter end, the client size, the client industry, the specific configurations associated with that quote, and then the terms analysis. Like I mentioned, there's a great talk at the end of the day about that terms analysis. And so we can see a lot of these results. I know Rourke, who will be speaking later today, is here. We've saved them a few $1 million. Red Robin spoke yesterday. We've saved them a couple $100,000 in the last 3 months or so. And then Officio is here as well, who is self-described as the world's largest procurement consultancy. And they buy our data. They buy our benchmarks. And so you can see that the power of this real data has created this competitive advantage and allows our clients to maintain that competitive advantage and use that for themselves as well. Thank you. And with that, any questions? Do we have time? Okay. Sure. So the question was, how specific are the benchmarks that we provide? So we have a couple different benchmark types, lightweight, comprehensive, and competitive. And so those are tiered basically with how in-depth we get with those benchmarks. The lightweight is kind of a price check on aisle 4, so it's basically how is the price that I'm quoted at compared to the best price that we can get. And that's always down to that line item level. So we're benchmarking at that line item level to make sure that you are getting the appropriate SKUs, the appropriate configuration, and we never make decisions for you to say this is the configuration that you should have. Comprehensive includes a terms analysis, and then competitive also includes that terms analysis, but then also brings in maybe if you want to take a look at some of the top competitors for this particular supplier, we can take a look at those as well. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was why we call it pass forensics. So we call it pass forensics essentially because it's a query tool where we're diving in and figuring out exactly information. We're essentially investigating, right? And so we liked that whole investigative mindset there, where we have a piece of information and then we're investigating that particular SKU or that particular configuration to figure out exactly what the best price and the best terms that we've seen have been. So the question was, how do we get our data? And so that's a great point. I kind of skipped over that, unfortunately. So we have 3 main silos of data. So the first one is OEM and VAR data. So we go out and we take in data from the OEMs, the VARs, the value-added resellers, to get kind of a baseline list price. And so we've been very successful in getting a lot of data from that, kind of as, again, that baseline to make sure that this is an idea of where that pricing lies. The second one, the biggest one, is client contracts. So we take in data from our clients, goes into pass forensics once it's been anonymized. We take out all client-specific information, all client-identifying information, so we can query all of these existing contracts without knowing exactly who the client is, and find out SKUs through those client contracts. And then the third one is client spend. So often our clients will send us kind of a spend or purchase history from their ERP system. And we take that in, we categorize that information, and host that in pass forensics as well. The question was, do benchmarks differ greatly between industries? And so are you talking specifically about like the industries, the client industries, or the industries that we are benchmarking? Sure. So again, they don't particularly differ a ton. They can in certain circumstances. But often what we're seeing is it's more, the parameters are largely more around entire size of the client, the proximity to exactly when that supplier needs that deal or when the client even needs that deal, and then some of the terms that are associated with that as well. We have time for one more question, I'm being told. Great question. So how old is the data in the database? So like I talked about before, we like to stay current. We like to stay relevant because technology procurement changes all the time. And so The data is automatically recycled out of the past forensics system every 24 months, but the data in past forensics is automatically prioritized by how recent it is. So we're always finding the most recent and most relevant results, and then we can go back further up to 24 months in order to find something if something doesn't exist more recently. So, all right, with that, I will turn it over back to Natalie. Thank you all for listening.